So you want to own a pawn shop, cash in a drawer, gold behind glass, a guy with nowhere else to turn. Everyone thinks they already know how this works. Guy walks in broke. Guy walks out with cash. He doesn't come back. The pawnbroker keeps the ring. Simple. Except that story is missing the entire business. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly why a pawnbroker profits, whether you repay that loan or not. You'll know why a Kansas City shop owner forfeited $744,000 to the federal government under a statute most people have never heard of. And you'll know why this industry gets lumped in with payday lenders in every headline, even though the two businesses barely resemble each other once you look at the actual math. What does it actually cost to open one of these? First, the license. Almost every state requires it. Most cities stack their own permit on top, just to make sure. To get that license, you need a surety bond, usually somewhere between $10,000 and $25,000, which is essentially a promise to the state that you'll follow the rules, or forfeit that money. You'll also go through a background check, and in a lot of cities, local zoning has to specifically approve a pawn business at that address. Then, security. This isn't optional. It's usually written directly into the law. Reinforced glass counters, steel bars, or roll-down gates on the windows and doors, a monitored alarm system, and cameras covering every transaction, sometimes required to record for a minimum number of days. Then, there's the compliance software. Every state now requires pawnbrokers to log every single transaction, item description, serial numbers, a scanned ID, and submit that data to a shared law enforcement database, usually every single night. That software isn't free, and neither is the staff training to use it correctly. Now, the part most people forget entirely. Cash reserves. A pawn shop is basically a tiny bank. Before you can lend a single dollar to a single customer, you need enough cash sitting in the vault to fund loans all day, every day, without running dry. Add up the real estate lease in a high-foot traffic strip mall, the security build-out, the compliance systems, staff trained to spot fraud and forged IDs, and enough cash on hand to actually run a lending counter. And a legitimate, fully stocked pawn shop can easily run several $100,000s to open. Some multi-counter operations cross well past $1 million before the doors ever unlock. One more thing before we move on, because it changes everything about how this business actually runs. A pawn shop isn't one business. It's two completely different businesses stapled together and run out of the same counter. Here's the part almost nobody outside the industry actually understands. The loan and the retail store are not the same revenue stream. They just happen to share a building. Engine 1 is the loan business. When you pawn something, you're not selling it. You're borrowing against it, and the shop charges a monthly interest and service fee on that loan, the same way a bank charges interest, just over a much shorter timeline and at a much higher rate. That fee is pure profit for the shop the moment it's collected, whether or not you ever redeem your item. Engine 2 is the retail store. Anything that isn't redeemed, plus anything bought outright from a walk-in customer, becomes inventory that gets cleaned up, tagged, and sold off the shelf at full retail price. Industry-wide, that retail side runs on margins in the low to mid-40s, somewhere around 42 to 44%, which is a margin most conventional retailers would kill for. This is exactly why the biggest company in this industry isn't a scrappy corner shop anymore. It's a publicly traded chain. First Cash Holdings operates more than 3,000 pawn stores across the United States, Latin America, and the UK, and its U.S. pawn business alone is expected to generate roughly 65% of the company's total segment earnings. So the real business of owning a pawn shop isn't handing cash across a counter. It's running a short-term lending desk that automatically restocks its own retail store every single time a customer doesn't come back. Now let's actually do the math on one of these loans, because the numbers are wilder than most people realize. Say you bring in a gold watch worth about $1,000 at resale. The shop isn't going to lend you $1,000 against it. Pawnbrokers typically lend somewhere between 25 and 60% of an item's actual resale value. On that watch, that's a loan somewhere between $250 and $600. Let's say $400. That gap isn't greed, it's the shop protecting itself. If you never come back, they still need enough room to cover their costs and make a profit reselling it. Now, the interest. Rates are set state by state, and the range is enormous. Louisiana, under revised statute 37:1791, flatly caps pawnbrokers at 10% a month. Not a suggestion. A hard ceiling written into the state's professions and occupations code. California runs 20 to 25% a month. Some states allow rates that work out past 240, even 300% a year. One exception cuts across every one of those state lines. The Military Lending Act, codified at 10 U.S.C. Section 987, protects active duty military and their dependents with a flat 36% annual cap, no matter what the local rate says. Let's use a 20% monthly rate on that $400 loan. That's $80 in interest for a single month, on top of whatever storage or appraisal fee the shop tacks on. Annualized, that's an APR north of 200%. On paper, that sounds predatory. In practice, almost nobody is paying a full year of that rate, because these loans are built to be short. And here's the number that actually explains why this business is so stable. According to the National Pawnbrokers Association, the trade group that tracks industry-wide lending data, roughly 85% of customers repay their loan and get their item back within the standard 30 to 60-day window, which means most of the time, the shop's entire risk on that loan lasts about a month, and the return is pure interest income on money that was already sitting in the vault doing nothing. And the other 15% isn't a loss either, because the loan was never more than 60% of resale value in the first place. When someone doesn't come back, the shop just keeps an item worth more than what they lent out and sells it on the retail floor at that 40+% margin we already talked about. It's a business with almost no bad debt risk in either direction. Repaid, they collect interest. Forfeited, they collect a marked-up asset. Heads, they win. Tails, they still win. One more thing that makes this loan structure unusual. It's called non-recourse debt. If you don't repay, the shop keeps your item. Full stop. And here's where most coverage of this industry gets it wrong. Pawn loans keep getting lumped into the same bucket as payday loans. They're not the same animal. A payday loan chases your next paycheck. Miss it, and the debt follows you. A collector calls. Your credit takes the hit. Sometimes a court judgment shows up years later. A pawn loan chases an object sitting in a vault, not a person. Miss it, and the consequence stops at that object. Nothing follows you home. That single structural difference is the reason payday lenders keep getting banned state by state, while pawnbrokers keep quietly expanding into the same neighborhoods. Here's the catch. Running a pawn shop comes with a layer of legal exposure that has nothing to do with interest rates or margins. Every single item that crosses that counter has to be logged and reported to law enforcement, usually every night, through compliance platforms like Leads Online, software built specifically to feed pawn and second-hand transaction data straight into police records management systems. That's why almost every state also requires a mandatory holding period, usually somewhere between 30 and 90 days, before a pawned item can legally be resold. It exists for one reason. It gives police time to cross-check that serial number against every stolen property report in the system before that item quietly disappears back into circulation. And this is the part that catches shop owners off guard. If an item turns out to be stolen, even if the shop had absolutely no idea, in most states they lose it, with no compensation, back to the original owner. The loan money the shop already handed out is just gone. That's the cost of doing business in an industry where you're legally required to buy things from strangers with no questions asked about where they came from, as long as the paperwork checks out. Then, there's straightforward physical risk. A storefront full of gold, guns, guitars, and electronics with a register full of cash is exactly the kind of target that gets robbed. That means real, ongoing security spending. Cameras, alarm monitoring, sometimes armed security, on top of the security build-out required just to open in the first place. And the quietest risk of all, insider risk. A single employee who decides to look the other way on a customer with a shopping cart full of suspiciously new, still boxed merchandise can turn a legitimate storefront into a fencing operation without the owner even realizing it's happening at first. None of these costs show up in the price of the loan you write. They show up later, sometimes years later, in a single, very bad month. Now let's talk about when this actually goes wrong, because it has more than once, and the story is a good one. In Kansas City, Missouri, a pawn shop called National Pawn was run for years by a man named Dennis Russell, one of two board members of the company that owned it. Starting in 2017, Russell began knowingly buying merchandise he knew was stolen. New, still boxed retail goods lifted from stores across the Kansas City area and reselling it in bulk on eBay for cash. This went on for nearly 5 years before federal investigators caught up with him. In 2021, law enforcement executed a search warrant on the store and seized 3,400 items on the spot. Merchandise that Russell and the business didn't even bother contesting was stolen. He pleaded guilty to 1 count of conspiracy to transport stolen property across state lines, a charge brought under 18 U.S.C. Section 2314. The same federal statute known as the National Stolen Property Act. The final numbers are the part that actually lands. According to the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Western District of Missouri, the sentence was a $100,000 fine, 20 months in federal prison without parole, and $744,222 forfeited to the government. Every dollar that scheme ever made. Gone. Plus a fine on top, plus 20 months. And this isn't some rare one-off story. In 2025, federal prosecutors in New York charged the co-owner of a Manhattan pawn shop in the city's famous Diamond District with running a similar operation, fencing stolen luxury watches and jewelry lifted from wealthy homes across the country. That case drew national attention because investigators tied members of the burglary crew involved to a break-in at NFL quarterback Joe Burrow's home, though the pawn shop owner himself wasn't charged in connection with that specific burglary. He pleaded guilty to conspiracy to receive stolen property, the companion charge to the Kansas City case under 18 U.S.C. Section 2315, and faces up to 5 years in prison, along with roughly $2.5 million in restitution and forfeiture. That's the part nobody's selling you on this business mentions. You're not just running a lending counter. You're the one legally responsible for verifying every single day that a stranger walking in off the street actually owns what they're trying to hand you. Get that wrong often enough, or look the other way even once, and the business that was supposed to make you money becomes the thing that puts you in federal court. So where is this industry actually headed? 2 directions at once, and they're both already well underway. The first is gold. Gold prices have climbed sharply over the past couple of years, and that has a direct effect on this business that most people wouldn't expect. When gold is worth more, the same ring or chain that used to get someone a $200 loan now gets them $400 or $500 against the exact same item. Bigger loan amounts, bigger interest checks, and a stronger incentive for customers to bring gold in instead of leaving it in a drawer. The second shift is digital. A growing number of online first lenders now let someone photograph a Rolex or a diamond ring, get a preliminary appraisal from an app, and mail the item in for a loan. No physical storefront required at all. It's the exact same lending model, just with the counter replaced by a shipping label. And just like the junkyard industry, this business is consolidating fast. First Cash Holdings has been buying up smaller regional chains for years, including a major UK pawnbroker expanding into Latin America, and steadily turning what used to be thousands of independent mom-and-pop counters into one publicly traded Wall Street reporting company. The corner pawn shop your grandfather might have used isn't disappearing overnight, but the same consolidation story we've seen in gas stations, car dealerships, and junkyards is quietly playing out here too. For independent shop owners, this is the next version of the same pressure every small business in a consolidating industry eventually faces. Compete on trust and local relationships, or get squeezed out by a chain that can lend more and undercut on interest. So, does owning a pawn shop actually make sense? In the optimistic scenario, you're running a loan business with almost no bad debt risk, backed by a retail store with margins most industries would envy, and rising gold prices are quietly inflating your average loan size for free. In the realistic scenario, a single employee looks the other way on the wrong customer. A shipment of stolen goods moves through your counter, and federal investigators show up with a search warrant before you even know there's a problem. The difference between those two outcomes usually isn't luck. It's whether you treated the compliance side of this business with exactly the same seriousness as the profit side every single day, not just when a regulator happened to be watching. A pawn shop isn't really a loan business. It's a resale business wearing a bank's clothing, standing behind a counter that has to double as a crime scene investigation waiting to happen. Get the compliance right and stay disciplined on the loan-to-value math. And this is one of the most resilient small businesses in the country, recession or not. Get it wrong, and the counter you built your business on becomes Exhibit A. If you want to see exactly what happens when a junkyard, a casino, or a funeral home gets the same math wrong instead, the rest of this channel is full of them. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.